think that around elections, it seems like it's so obvious that democracy corresponds to casting a vote, but for many of us in our everyday life, our vote will have no significance. And in many elections, we may not feel immediate effect on our lives from that vote. But if we think of democracy in terms of how people feel when they say it, I think they're locating it more in their everyday practices, right? It's the community that they draw on, a kind of diversity of opinions that they value, and also having their own opinion valued and being free to express it.
And I guess I had a teacher in high school. She was my ethnic studies teacher, and she said, like, participation in, I don't know if she framed it as like participation in democracy or just like she said you have a toolbox and like you can do several things if you want to make any sort of change. You can make calls to your representatives, you can march in the streets, you can actually run for office yourself, you can make public service announcements, things like that. And so I guess being able to do any of those things is a form of participation. I would say that like marching and demonstration is some way to participate in democracy because you're advocating for something that you want to be enacted in your government.
I was trying to think of the specific times when I've participated in democracy other than voting. And like I have written into my senator, Ed Markey, and I got an email saying like, oh, thanks for getting in touch with me. I really care, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what happened, right? And I think a really tough thing is that even when the message from the citizenry reaches the level of like hundreds of thousands of people in the street, we might not ever know what the result of that march was.
Like what happened up in Minnesota when there were big demonstrations, as you guys know, after George Floyd was killed, and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people were calling for defunding the police, and the group of, I guess it's aldermen or city councilmen got together, and a couple of them led an initiative to make a statement saying that they vowed to try to defund the police and eventually get rid of the Minneapolis Police Department. But then later, upon interviewing some of these city councilmen, they said, "Oh, we thought this was a statement of solidarity, but not actually a real promise. Like we did this to like show that we support the idea, but not that we're actually promising, even though the instructions was for anybody who actually wanted to put this forth should be on this stage and should show their support."
But even if the changes that demonstrators seek to bring about end up happening, it's hard to say that the demonstration is what caused that change to happen. I don't know.
It's not solely, any direct action would be democratic, right? Or fascist rallies democratic? No, we wouldn't say that. I think there's an importance to reclaim a conceptual core of democracy where you are able to, in a certain way, shame the government and shame those actors. And you shame them through the direct action like protests, not merely because protest might achieve something on its own, but it should reflect what the institutions are not achieving and how they're falling short of a democratic ideal.
So this is like one of my favorite books from the summer, Romance of American Communism. Vivian Gornick wrote it in the 1970s. And in this passage, Vivian Gornick is talking about her parents, who were these German, Jewish, communist workers living in New York City in this just this whole network of other leftist thinkers and workers. and she's talking about sitting around her parents' kitchen table. And she says, when these people sat down at the kitchen table to talk, politics sat down with them. Ideas sat down with them, above all. History sat down with them. They spoke and thought within a context that had world-making properties. This context lifted them out of the nameless, faceless obscurity of the soul into which they had been born, and gave them, for the first time in their lives, a sense of rights as well as of obligations. So I don't know. I guess I freaked out when I first read this passage, thinking about what it means to come together around ideas and talk, which I also think is incredibly foundational to the practices and ideologies and institutions of democracy. And I think this is part of the pleasure of participating in a democratic space or of engaging with the demos, right? It's like making links laterally in that moment with people in terms of talking about those ideas, but also placing oneself within a broader historical trajectory by unfolding your life and your sort of political condition into longer spans of political time.
You shouldn't seek to engage in political activity or in democracy because it will be fun, or with the hopes that it will be fun. Maybe like a dumb analogy, but you don't start when you set out to meet friends and to get new friends. If you set out with the purpose of meeting new friends, it's actually I feel it's more difficult. Whereas if you start just doing other activities and just trying to talk to people without actually trying to be their friends, you end up having better relationships and making more friends that way. So I think it can fun can definitely be a byproduct of political involvement, but I don't think political involvement should be thought of as, oh, we should have fun with it.
I have never thought of our democratic processes as fun. I think we tend to think about them as obligatory. If my vote ever mattered, if my vote was the one, that election is going to be contested in court. So my vote really didn't. Right.
Enjoyment and democracy, I think, is a good question to ask, because a lot of us don't enjoy democracy, right? We find it a frustrating experience. But I think in that frustration is a link to enjoyment, because you get to have your choices presented in public. Now, they don't have to be 100% respected, but they're certainly not respected in those other systems. So I think it's that, even for those who don't like the conflict, they like that other people have to listen to them. So it's enjoyable for them, even if it's sometimes frustrating. One of the most clear senses of belonging somewhere and proudest was being in a movie theater in Brooklyn right at the time when they started to do ads before the previews came on. So, it was a Wesley Snipes movie that I was going to see with my dad. I was probably a teenager, and a car commercial came on, and immediately just a bucket of popcorn went right for the screen, and they said, turn it off, we don't watch that here. And they did, right? It was this amazing moment, and everyone cheered in the theater.